I wanted to talk to you today about how to create a geotourism package. Uh, so let's see if I can get this started. Okay, so my talk today is based on some work that I've done in Lombok over a number of years. And I'm lucky to have visited Lombok a number of times um, to meet um, people from Mataram University and also a number of people who have been involved in Australia Awards Indonesia projects, including the talented Melly, who invited me to do this talk. And in fact, you'll see Melly has already done some work on creating a geotourism package in Lombok as part of her Australia Awards Indonesia Sustainable Development for Tourism course that she did a couple of years ago. And I'm going to be basing a lot of my discussion and talk on Melly's work, but I'm just going to add a few things to it about perhaps how we could go. Generally, if you want to think about designing a geotourism package, my main message is that I want you to think about developing not a package, but an experience for visitors. And you do that in a fairly simple process. You start off by identifying the resources through research and consultation that you can use for your developing the experience. Then you think about how to shape those resources to create interest, emotion, and a unique selling proposition for your market. So you need to think about not just the resources, but how visitors, potential visitors, are going to react to that to make it, to position the product in the right format for your markets. And I'll talk about that. And then, of course, once you do that, then you can come up with a product, a price, work out how to promote it, and then implement it after doing some market testing, as Melly has already done. So what is the resource we're going to talk about here in Lombok? Well, the first one is Mount Rinjani. Now, it's very interesting. Mount Rinjani, I think, dominates the landscape of Lombok. And so you can pretty much see it wherever you go in Lombok. And it's an important center, both geologically, but also culturally, and has had a profound effect both on the environment of Lombok, but it's also had a profound effect on the people of Lombok. And the relationship between the people of Lombok and Mount Rinjani, I think, is a very interesting story, which is not very clear, I think, to overseas people. And I think that's part of developing a experience for visitors. But of course, the main one that we're going to talk about here is also this volcanic eruption. And as I've learned more about this, it's fascinating. So Mount Samalas was a very high mountain, much higher than Mount Rinjani, which exploded in 1257. So about almost 800 years ago. And although it wasn't known until recently, this was the biggest volcanic eruption in recent, in the last 2,000 years. And in fact, triggered an ice age, a little ice age well, around the world, and was also noticed in Europe. So the years after 1257 were actually colder and led to famines. So there's a connection between this explosion and history around the world, which is again very important in creating a experience for visitors. So what we call Mount Rinjani now is a remnant or part of a larger volcanic complex that exploded in 1257. And here we see some information which is already available. Melly has developed this, I think, which shows the effect of the sunless eruption around the world. So that's a great story that illustrates the importance of this of the eruption. And today, when we go to Lombok, we will find that the landscape has been shaped by this eruption. So the Semmelus caldera erupted, creating enormous what they call pyroclastic flows. So these are flows of gravel, rock, perhaps water mixed together, which flow down the mountain and destroy anything in their path. And there were three main paths that have been found by scientists, three main flows. These flows were enormous. So on the right-hand side, you can see that I'm standing at the base of a pyroclastic flow that might be 20 meters deep. And so this makes a extremely interesting physical representation of this disaster, and is the basis for part of a very emotional story about the effects of this caldera, the eruption. There has been, as I've been through the literature, reading more about this volcanic eruption, you'll be able to see that there's a lot of information already available. And one of the interesting things that I found is that this, some research has already tried to identify the shape of the landscape prior to the eruption, and also has identified that this eruption buried a town, buried the capital of the kingdom of Pamatan, which was the kingdom that inhabited Lombok at that time. And this is a wonderful part of a story which I hadn't heard about before. So here we have a hook or part of a very interesting story that has great resonance and engagement for people, I think, especially people from Australia and other Western countries. So the lost city of Pamatan, what a great idea. The Pompeii of the East. That's a very engaging and interesting story, narrative, which could be built into an experience, but I hadn't seen that previously. And I would strongly encourage you to investigate locating that city, because if you can locate the site of that city and start to excavate it, you will have an experience of a global scale. There are other things which I found interesting about the Mount Rinjani and the general area, and that is that one of the 10,000 rupiah notes actually had an image of the caldera and its lake. And so that to me indicates that there is some significant recognition of Mount Rinjani and the area in the domestic market in Indonesia. But going further, we find some historical information about from the time of the eruption that was written down by people at that time. The Babad Lombok is a historical record of that event, which makes it incredibly interesting. But again, I hadn't seen that before. I hadn't seen any information about that connects the explosion to the culture and history of the local people, which I think would be part of an interesting story. Generally, though, the in much of Lombok, the environment is very beautiful, green and luxuriant, and there are a number of other things to see in the area at the basically at the base of Mount Rinjani. But to me, these things are interesting, but they're not the main story. The main story is about the volcano, its eruption, and its effects on people. So perhaps you can build visits to the farming communities or the products, but you have to relate that back to this central idea, the central theme of the story. So if we look at a summary of the tangible and intangible resources that Lombok has, if we look at the tangible resources, the things that we can include to show to tourists in our experience, there's Mount Rinjani itself, a great tangible feature to show people and to explain to people. We've got tangible examples of the pyroclastic flows that occurred in a quarry in numerous locations around around Lombok. We've got the image that we can show people of the old 10,000 rupiah note. We've got a bamboo book recording the history of the eruption, although I'm not sure where that is. And I believe we were looking to develop a visitor center, which can be a location for displaying artifacts and perhaps audio-visual material for visitors. We've also got a number of intangible features that we can tell people about. I think one which is not being made use of is this lost city. We've got this idea that the eruption was connected to an ice age around the world. And in fact, we've also got cultural interpretations, the connections of the local people to Mount Rinjani, which I don't see are very clearly connected at the moment. So if I had to think about all of this stuff boiled down, there's some strengths. We've got Mount Rinjani, which is the world's largest explosion. That's something which I think is incredibly valuable as a resource to talk to people about. But a weakness of this experience or the resources is that there is little physical evidence of the tragedy. You can go and see a pyroclastic flow or the layering, but at the moment that story isn't being brought alive. And that's what I think is the big issue about developing a package for a geotourism experience, is to somehow bring the story of the eruption and its effects on people and the relationship to Mount Rinjani alive in a way which creates emotion and a valuable story for people. So this is where we start to talk not about the resources, the things that you have, but how we can transform these stories into an experience for visitors. So this is, visitors don't go to see Mount Rinjani, they go to experience it, to learn, to experience some adventure, some romance, some excitement, some learning, and those are the things that we want to include. So I think that if we take the resources, the physical and the intangible resources, and try and work out how to present it, we need to relate it to a theme. Now, the theme, I've identified 3 themes here. So in theory, you could develop 3 different packages based with different content and targeted at different people. The first one, I called it Lost Civilizations. So this is about an experience that talks about the romance and tragedy of being, of a civilization, of a people, of a kingdom being destroyed by the volcano, and perhaps how people have then overcome that. So here we would talk about Pamantan, we would talk about the bamboo book, we would look at the pyroclastic flows, but we would talk about perhaps how that has affected people at the time and since. We might talk about the cultural connection to Mount Rinjani of the local people and adaptability of the local people to challenge. So that's one. There's a second theme, which is perhaps more the traditional geotourism package. So that's about emphasizing only the science, the geology of the area, and talk about Mount Rinjani as a volcano, the pyroclastic flows, and perhaps the largest eruption and its effects in the Ice Age. So here we'd be trying to emphasize the awe and wonder of nature and how it can affect people, and but focus on the science of it. And to me, that's good, but I think it misses some of the romance and tragedy of that lost civilization. A third theme that we could position our experience or our geotourism package about is perhaps more generally about Mount Rinjani and being a source of life. So this would be more about appreciation of nature generally. And you'd be talking about Mount Rinjani, the environment of Lombok, and perhaps bringing in some of the culture and the importance of Mount Rinjani to local culture. So what I'm trying to say is, at the moment, we're talking about a geotourism package, but I think there's many different ways to relate the eruptions of Mount Rinjani to the marketplace in experiences. So we might actually think about focusing these different themes or different packages for different groups of people. I think international people from Australia and overseas would be particularly interested in lost civilizations. The idea that Lombok, the eruption of Mount Rinjani, or led to a lost civilization. But they might also be interested in Mount Rinjani as a source of life. That is about understanding what Lombok is and the central place of Mount Rinjani in Lombok. I think that for international visitors, the idea of a science geotourism package is interesting, but it's a smaller market. However, for school children, especially for local school children, people or families, they might be more interested in the traditional geotourism package, the science of volcanoes. And the unique selling point here would be it's part of their education, and you could link it to the study of geology or history of people, of students in primary or secondary school in Indonesia. I think then I'm less certain about the attraction for the various different themes for local people or for other Indonesians, but perhaps you could do some work to see which theme might be attractive to which target market. So then, once you've done that, let's think about the way of presenting that experience to people. And there's a number of different ways, which all can provide part or the whole geotourism experience. So one way might actually be to provide a self-guided tour. This might be something that a homestay might offer to entertain people or to provide people with an add-on experience. You might allow people to walk around the village or walk around the area by themselves or with a tour guide and learn about the geology or the other themes of the area. The key issue here is knowledge, making sure that the guides are knowledgeable and interesting, able to present the material in a entertaining, interesting, and engaging way, and of course, language. So in the absence of people able to speak the language, perhaps a self-guided tour might be good, but it would be preferable if there was a professionally guided tour, but that requires lots of training for these guides. And I'm not aware, there may be, but I'm not aware of the guides who have the experience to talk about, for example, the lost civilization in with a lot of knowledge. Another way, and I think this would be a useful way of developing the experience, is to further enhance a visitor information and interpretation center. And in fact, I think if you could develop, create more knowledge about the lost city or create audio-visual material and 3D images of the eruptions to better communicate it to people, then I think a museum or a visitor information center would actually be very useful. But it would need to have good exhibits which are exciting and interesting. Of course, you can also add on to that food and beverage. So any geotourism package or experience should offer food and beverage options, which can be a great way of getting extra revenue. And of course, you can connect it to an overnight package, especially if you've got enough things for people to do to occupy them, or perhaps if the geotourism experience is connected to a longer tour. Okay, so let's say that you've got now your theme, you've got, so you've thought about how you're going to develop it, you've got some trained staff. The next thing, of course, is to start to do your market research. And I think Melly has done a lot of work here. She's shown information about a visitor information centre. This visitor information centre, I think, would be suitable to start with, but I think it could be developed further with investment in interesting displays and exhibits, especially ones which can create emotion, perhaps through audio-visual material or even 3D virtual experiences. Geo homestays. So these geo homestays at the moment are, I would call it basic, that may be suitable for backpackers or for the 1 to 2 star market, or certainly perhaps for local or regional visitors. And then they can be connected to a tour or a walking tour, for example, perhaps to the top of Mount Rinjani. But I think if you want to develop if you want to attract the higher market, the 3, 4, 5 star market, then you'll be doing tours from the hotels in Mataram or Simgigi or other places. Melly has done a lot of work on a tour package itinerary and pricing. My comments on this are that the theme is not clear. The theme of this tour is partly about a volcanic eruption, but it tries to bring many things together. And I think it needs, and that's because the physical evidence of the eruption is weak, and there's need to develop that intangible or audio-visual side of things and train people to know more about the history of the eruption or the lost city. But typically, what Melly has done is very good. She has developed a 2-day itinerary with lots of parts, some interesting music, which is good, and given a price to it. So this is what you have to do, and some reaction from a visitor. And do some market testing and find out what works, work with local people to actually develop it, and perhaps see how people react to staying overnight, get the local governor involved, which is a good thing, and then create a package. Now that's good. I think what Melly's done is wonderful. I think that she has not been ambitious enough. I think that there is more to do here to take this, what would be a regional attraction, something which is a half-a-day tour, perhaps, to something which could be an attraction in itself. That is taking, developing a visitor information center, theming it around theming around the volcano, the science, but perhaps even about the lost city. And I would encourage the people of Lombok to do more research on finding that city. And if you can find that city, you've got a global tourist attraction. So thinking for the future, I'd suggest finding ruins, which gives you some physical evidence, which would be the basis for a great lost civilizations package. I think you need an interpretation center, but I think you need to be more aggressive in developing interesting interpretation material, perhaps audio-visual material. And I've found online lots of interesting videos, some of which are actually about the geotourism, the science of volcanoes, and even about Mount Rinjani. And I would encourage you to collect some of that and use it. You may want to think about developing a self-guided walking tour, but certainly it's about training the local people in the history of the volcano and giving them language skills. And then another idea, you see, the history of Mount Rinjani, or this volcanic eruption, is not just located in one part of the island. And I think that it could be developed more in terms of a touring loop around the island. This is something that I did. You can actually even make souvenirs. This is made from recycled plastic about Mount Rinjani and sell them to tourists. That might be an interesting way of making a little bit of money. And even themed food. Here's just an idea. It's a fun idea that I thought. So if you want to bring the idea of geotourism alive, maybe you could have some meals, a cake, which looks like a volcano, or a pyroclastic flow, a cake which looks like a pyroclastic flow, or even have a geo menu with lots of different things that you sell to tourists. That again is not just selling science, but selling fun and excitement, especially for young people. Here's an example of a drive tour in Scotland, which is based on geotourism, and I think maybe could be part of a tour of northern Lombok that you could think about. So I found that there's lots of information about the volcanic eruptions on Lombok, which can be used to train people. So I'd encourage you to do that. So overall, I'm very interested in the, I think that there's lots of opportunities for developing geotourism packages, and I'd encourage you to investigate those things in future. Very happy to take questions. Thank you.